Well, since we kind of have a little bit of a exciting, perhaps maybe lengthy program planned for today, I'm going to go ahead and get started, even though we have people still joining us. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning for Coffee with the Collection. My name is Amanda. I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement here at the Fred Jones Jr. Museum of Art. Before we get started, let's go over a little housekeeping first. So everyone should be on mute right now, and I'd like to ask you all to keep yourselves muted so that we can hear our presenters without any distractions. But if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question during our presentation, please feel free to do so using the chat feature. To open your chat, just scroll down to the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on the icon that looks like a speech bubble. It should also say chat just underneath. Once you click that, a window will open to the side of your screen where you'll be able to type questions and comments, and we'll circle back around to those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. So let's get started. We have a very special Coffee with the Collection for you today with two wonderful presenters that I would like to introduce to you all. We have Dr. Hadley Jerman and Dr. Harold Brooks. They'll both be discussing Joe Goode's tornado paintings in the OKLA exhibition, as well as works in our permanent collection. Dr. Hadley Jerman received her BFA in graphic design and an MA in art history from OU. She originally set out pursuing a career as a graphic designer, working for OU Outreach, the University of Science and Arts of Oklahoma, and the Sam Noble Museum. While working on her master's degree, Hadley had the opportunity to pursue internships at the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Wyoming and the Whitney Gallery of Western Art, also in Wyoming. These opportunities then led Hadley to pursue a different career field altogether, that of a museum curator. In 2016, Hadley was hired as the Eugene B. Adkins Curator at the Fred Jones Jr. Museum of Art, and most recently received her PhD degree in the art of the American West. And joining Hadley today is our colleague, Dr. Harold Brooks. Dr. Brooks is a senior research scientist at NOAA's National Severe Storms Laboratory and an affiliate professor of meteorology at the University of Oklahoma. He received an undergraduate degree in physics and math from William Jewell College with an additional year at Cambridge University. His master's degrees are from Columbia University in atmospheric sciences. His PhD is from the University of Illinois, where he modeled supercell thunderstorms. He's worked on climatology, forecasting, and impacts of severe thunderstorms and tornadoes. He also works on forecast evaluation, lately focusing on decision-making under uncertainty, which absolutely makes Dr. Brooks the ideal panelist for today's discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to invite everyone to sit back and relax, grab your cup of coffee. Hopefully you have with you a twisted cup of Joe made especially available for this program through our friends at Black Camel Coffee, and will continue to be available on their website for purchase after this program. But before I hand this over to Hadley to get us started, I'd like to ask everyone a question that you can answer by typing into the chat window that I mentioned earlier. So my question for you all is, what's the first word, the first thing that comes to mind when you think about a tornado? I type that into the chat for us. Scary, Twister, Oklahoma. Whoa, there's a lot of, okay, Gary England. Bill Paxton, oh, that's great. Darkness, definitely. Sounds like a train. More Oklahoma, terrifying. There's a couple of terrifyings in there, I see. May 3rd. Wizard of Oz. There were a few references to the Wizard of Oz. Definitely. Crazy wind, right? Casters. So that's interesting. We have some very interesting observations, you know, things that are talking about terrifying and everything being dark. And then we have some very specific things that come to mind to a few of you that are mentioning people's names, family members. So that's runs the gamut, it looks like. Hadley, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you.
Okay. Well, I think probably the personal and the large scale responses to the idea of tornado is actually something that's relevant to our discussion today about Joe Goode's own series, multiple series actually, on tornadoes. And we could actually say that weather has played a critical role in Joe Goode's career. So when debating between going to Los Angeles, Kansas City, or New York after high school to study art, it was a snowstorm in Oklahoma City that really made up his mind for him. He later recalled thinking he could freeze to death in Oklahoma or New York or Kansas City, so he might as well join his friend Jerry McMillan in Los Angeles at Chenard Art Institute. And he began painting the sky in the mid-1960s, especially after moving from Los Angeles to Springville, California, which is in the foothills of the Sierras. And a great example is this, here I'm gonna change the slide if I can, is this triptych, which is actually in OKLA. It's not in our permanent collection, it's on loan. Now, Joe Goode admits that his interest in climate and meteorology had a lot to do with growing up in Oklahoma. He said, you know, you can see the weather coming before it gets there. And the tornado series in particular comes from a kind of brief period in 1991, a really prolific period in the early 90s. And it's sandwiched between, let me show you, his environmental impact series of the 1980s, which contains abstractions of the earth, of trees, of forest fires, of waterfalls, and ocean depths. So on the far left, this is from his tree series in 1987. And then just immediately after the tornado series in 91, he moves on and starts depicting the ozone in different spots around the world. So on the screen is Calcutta from 1992. This is number 36 in that series. And then later on, the Sunspot series in the later 90s, in the mid to late 90s. So you could say that the tornado series, just as the tornadoes connect, you know, the ground and the sky visibly, they bridge this period in his career when he's dealing with things of the earth, trees and the ground and waterfalls, and then things of the atmosphere and beyond with the ozone series and the sunspot series. Now, throughout these series, he was always interested in dealing with perception. So he painted trees and waterfalls and the ozone, tornadoes even, with the perspective that there's something that you can look through, but also something that you're looking up at and looking down at simultaneously. And Goode noted, quote, "I've been taking an image that is really close to me and then getting further and further away. I was doing that even in the tornadoes, exploring this idea that you could see something like a volume of air coming towards you or going away from you, getting further and further out. And I wasn't even conscious of that when I started. It's kind of like painting my own history or trying to paint my own history or using my own history as subject matter," end quote. And in fact, this idea of painting his own history, there's an autobiographical element to all of his work. So if I'm gonna switch the slide here you can see he's making one of these tornado paintings. And they show up in multiple media. We'll look at a couple of different examples today. But they relate to his personal life and to his past. As Ed Ruscha, Joe Goode's friend, says, even the abstract paintings contain a nagging tie to Joe's past. So the tornado series in particular is inspired by his childhood in Oklahoma, but also specifically by meteorologist Gary England's book, 1987 book, Those Terrible Twisters, which Joe incidentally picked up in the airport in Oklahoma City before flying home to Los Angeles. And the image on the left, this is a little peek behind the scenes. So it's one of the paintings in our collection, or that will be in our collection. It's a promised gift, and it's hanging in the vault. And you can see in the background a cameo. Our chief registrar is unpacking another gift in the background. And then on the right, Joe is creating one of these sumi-e paintings, which is a Japanese painting technique that was learned in the 14th century, or came to Japan in the 14th century with Chinese Zen monks. Okay. So just to give you an idea about the kind of unpredictability, I guess, of this medium, and we have one of these paintings, not Drew, but a different one on view in OKLA. He would have to moisten the paper first, which is he's doing in this picture, and then he would put ink on it. And there's not really a lot of, you can kind of direct the ink, but you don't have a lot of control over where it goes, and you certainly can't erase. So I just wanted to show you one more of these. This is not in our exhibit because it's simply too big. It's 14 feet tall and 48 feet long. But just to give you an idea of the kind of variety of the aesthetics of these paintings that are made simply with black ink on white paper. This particular series he painted with a broom, a mop, and a spray tank, and he walked across it on the floor. Before we move on, I just wanted to make the point that unpredictability and chance is a critical component to these tornado paintings, not even just the paintings, but also the prints. It's, in a sense, the subject, and to some extent describes the process and the medium that Joe Goode employed to make these works. So sumi-e, this process is unpredictable. The etching process he used has, that we'll look at later, is unpredictable to some extent. And in the same way that the storms themselves are unpredictable, although I guess Dr. Brooks could tell us more about that. And the unpredictability of the media, I think, really conveys a sense that these are lively living things. They each have a personality, and you have a kind of a visceral response to them depending on how close they are. So I'd like to move ahead to a little video that will show you a couple of the paintings, the tornado paintings that are in OKLA. And then Dr. Brooks, I'd love for you to talk about these. I'm gonna change the slide, and then let's see if this will work for everybody. Okay. So this is in the gallery. You have the two paintings on the far wall, and then the sumi-e painting on the right. And just to let you know, the painting on the right in the distance, this is Woodward, and then Lion is the painting to the right, and then the far left. Oh my goodness, I've forgotten the title. It's Roger Mills to Cherokee County. So Dr. Brooks, we were in the gallery looking at these. And I thought you had some interesting responses, especially to this Woodward painting.
Yeah. The Woodward painting is, I mean, it's the one that we kind of connect with the 1947 Woodward Tornado. That's the deadliest tornado in Oklahoma history. And to me, the thing that really struck me was when you're a long distance away, you see distinctly a funnel-looking shape. You see the thing you might expect to see as a distance, and then as it approaches, you start to see the texture of the painting itself, and you start to lose actually the ability. This is the one on the right. You start to lose the ability to see the funnel. You start to see the stuff, and my real impression of that was, if the tornado was approaching you, and as it fills your entire field of vision, you start to see the debris and the objects inside of it, and that's what you actually start to see as what's happening. And it's when we hear from people who have experienced tornadoes, this is a common thing, that they almost say that tornado as it approached, it didn't look like a tornado because you no longer saw the funnel shape. And that it reminds me of when they made the movie Twister. They did a special showing in Texas for survivors of the Lancaster, Texas tornado that had happened the year before the movie came out. And one of the things that when I watched the movie, my impression was that it was loud, and I just didn't, that struck me as being something. And that was what the people who had experienced the tornado commented on. That was what resonated with them, was that feeling of the noise of the tornado was one of the things they remembered. And I would think that this sort of debris field, as it approaches you, would also be something that people would remember. So I think this is a painting that if you see it in the collection, you need to try to look at it from up close and from far away, because your impression of it, just as your impression if the tornado was approaching you, would be really, really different. And I really love that piece, and the you lose that distinctness of the tornado, and you start to see the colors of the, in some sense, the stuff that's in the tornado.
Well, here, I'm gonna switch the slide so we can look at a close-up of it. Whoops. There it is. So on the left, and then even closer, you can get a sense of the texture, which, so you do see a funnel in this painting.
If I look hard, yes. When I'm that close to it, again, that's the thing. I mean, I can tell there's that, the closer you get to it, the harder to me the funnel is to see. I can see that sort of black column coming, which is what I would associate with as being the funnel cloud. But you also see, and this is, this is classic Western Oklahoma stuff. There's that hint of red, and the red dirt, and that's any tornado in open space in Western Oklahoma, there's going to be red dirt getting thrown around, and you really see that. But you also see those other colors that are whatever the tornado has hit. Is what it's picked up, and you would see that, and that's, I think, the fact that the 3D texture on it, you really get that feeling there's stuff there.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and this is the Woodward Tornado of, I think you told the year
1947.
1947, which he would have been familiar with, if not, because he actually was alive at the time, but from this book, from Gary England's book. Right. But this isn't necessarily a representation of that specific tornado.
No, we don't have many of the tornadoes that Goode depicts. We don't have pictures of them that were actually taken at the time, and certainly we don't have any pictures of the Woodward tornado as it was occurring. We have lots of, as we'll show some in just a few minutes, we have lots of damage photographs from the Woodward tornado. But Woodward is, as I like to think of, there are tornadoes in locations that sort of there's almost a folk memory of them. Yeah. And Woodward, certainly for people who live in that vicinity, qualifies. Yeah, I interacted with a group of elementary school students in the mid 1990s in Gage, Oklahoma, so not very far away. And so these are kids who were born in the mid 1980s, so 40 years after the tornado. Every one of them could tell me about the Woodward tornado.
Wow.
And it just was that's a tornado that, with what it did, it sticks in people's mind. Just as for people around here, it'll be a long time before anybody forgets the May 3rd or the May 20th, the May 3rd, 1999, or the May 20th, 2013 tornadoes in Oklahoma City and more. Those are the kinds of events that get implanted beyond that generation.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's really interesting too, to think that he's painting these paintings in California, and they're not really of the specifics. I mean, they're inspired by this book, I guess you could say, but it's more about cultural memory, maybe, or the presence and popular memory of these storms. It's not really an actual depiction of that, the specifics of that particular tornado.
Yeah, we see that with weather events. There's certain weather events that that if you somehow have a connection with the area, even if you didn't personally experience it, you're aware that this gets handed down. People who live in southern Mississippi, the Hurricane Camille of 1969, Katrina in 2005 will be things. Obviously Katrina is going to last in people who are associated with New Orleans memory forever. The Galveston Tornado of 1900, that's our hurricane of 1900. That lives in Galveston now. You can see evidences of it in some sense. I grew up in St. Louis, and there are certain aspects of the three tornadoes the big tornadoes in St. Louis, 1896, 1927, and 1959, that you can get people to still understand what happened. and distill. And if you say the word tornado, they assume that's what's going to be happening is one of those kinds of events.
Wow. Well, I'm going to change the slide. So I think I do have one with, yep. So the image in the middle is from Joe's Twister's portfolio, which these are a series of etchings and aqua tints, which we'll look at some more of those in a minute. But so he's depicting Woodward in two different media in this case. And then the two images on the left, or excuse me, on the right, are from, you shared this link with me and I'm forgetting which particular one it was, but these are the destruction in Woodward after that tornado.
This is the damage photographs are from the National Weather Service office in Norman that has a piece on Woodward. Woodward was it's every tornado disaster has its unique footprint and story. This is early April. It's April 9th, 1947, and a cold front came through after the tornado, and so it was cold the next day, and there was a telephone operator strike going on at the time, and so actually word was very slow to get out of Woodward, and that was and so the people in Woodward were isolated. They've got roughly 100 people killed in town, which for a small town that's a big deal, and they're a long way away from anywhere that can help them. And so there's a real sense of the physical devastation, but also the emotional. We're completely on our own to recover from this feeling that the people would have had at the time, and I think that's the and that to me the two different depictions he has in the collection. One, you see, like I say, you see that feeling of debris, and the other one is here is this approaching thing.
Yeah.
And in lots of ways we sort of view we sort of view tornadoes, and this I've seen in other aspects of popular culture. There's this sort of entity, this the bad guy in the horror movie coming at you, and you can see it's happening.
Yeah.
And there's actually at this point there's not much you can do about it.
Right. You do kind of, even from that print, which is not huge, it's very ominous, and
right.
You kind of have a visceral response to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's if you saw this coming, by the time you could see that, there's not a whole lot, it's going to come incredibly close to you, and there's not much you can do about that. So.
Well, I want to show the other painting that's right next to Woodward, Roger Mills to Cherokee County, and we talked about this in the gallery too. A completely kind of different view of a tornado.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is sort of an interesting thing because this is Roger Mills to Cherokee County. That's western Oklahoma all the way to the eastern end of the state. Where this isn't really a particular event, and it's there's this feeling that this is the they can happen everywhere, and I think we were talking a couple of days ago that one of the things is that there's almost this feeling of you're watching it, you're looking at this tornado through a window with the rain coming down, and it's dark,
right.
And tornadoes after dark are particularly dangerous because you can't see things, and it's harder for a lot of ways. You still get those little bits of color coming in, but that there's almost that, to me there's almost the I'm looking through the windshield of a car, and it's after dark, and really something.
To me there's a bit of a column in the kind of right half, just on the right half of the painting, and that you're looking through these streams of what seems to be rain.
Right, and if we take that column as being the tornado, one of the things which is I think not unreasonable, one of the things that we typically see very near the tornado is what is called the clear slot, that's associated with air that's coming down, and essentially it's evaporating the water's evaporating as it comes down, and so you tend to see this clear area in the vicinity And if you're in just the right place, you might be able to see that hint of light coming through. Maybe that light area in the, to the left of it is, maybe that's maybe it's near sunset, and we're getting a little bit of light from the sun filtering through. But I won't call it completely, physically realistic, but it's at least consistent with what you might see in a real tornado. And then there's that more solid, maybe that's the base of the cloud that the tornado is forming out of at the top.
Well, I think that this is kind of it was kind of funny in the gallery when we saw this. I think it was in the gallery, maybe it was a few days ago when we talked. You said you didn't actually see a tornado in this painting, and you've been in Roger Mills County where you also didn't see a tornado.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding me of that. I back in the days when I chased my a day in which we made a bad decision that cost us seeing a tornado, but we saw an incredibly wonderful storm. Roger Mills County is a heavily rural county. It has some really beautiful places in it. It's the Antelope Hills and the Black Kettle National Grassland are out there. It's sort of classic short range or short grass prairie. And again, late in the day, it's especially early in the morning, late in the day when you get the light on the prairie, it's absolutely a beautiful place. I saw one of the prettiest thunderstorms I've ever seen in my life that day, and thought I had seen the best thing of the day until I came home and saw a picture from a friend that had the next storm up produced a tornado at sunset. So it has all the beautiful lighting on the tornado in the middle of a field of wildflowers. And I'm going, well, so I guess what I saw wasn't all that pretty given what I just now am seeing. But yeah, you go out to Cheyenne and Radon and all those places. It's when I think of Oklahoma, rural Oklahoma, there's a lot of really pretty places out there. They're not as, and that the appeal of the aesthetics of the play of the light and the grasses is wonderful. It's not as obvious. The places we have in Oklahoma is maybe a place like Colorado where you go, well, there's that big tall stuff over there that looks pretty interesting west of Denver. But you get into a lot of those little places. They're sort of small areas of exceptional beauty in the state that sometimes we don't really appreciate.
It's kind of a humble beauty, and actually I think that Joe and also his friends, Ed, and Paul Richet, I think they appreciated that too. That kind of
it's I think it appeals to artists in particular because there is that play of the light. And that it's you can, middle of the day, sometimes it's not the, when the light is a little harsher, the grasslands look very empty, and you get to that warm light at the end of the day, beginning of the day, and colors start to come out. And one of the things many storm chasers, when you have to appreciate the fact that on days that you don't see storms, or they don't behave perhaps the way you would want them to, there's still a lot of beauty to see. And that interplay of light with and you get a little bit of rolling hills, so you get shadows and everything else. It's a really pretty sight that is, it's subtle. Like I said, it's subtle beauty.
Yeah. I agree. Actually, I think I'll move. One more thing I wanted to point out about this painting is that you don't really think of, I don't think the Woodward painting does this so much, but that gravity actually helps him make this painting. That it is, in this case, the paint itself is unpredictable in a way, those streams of pigment that are falling down the canvas. And that is especially evident, this kind of unpredictability of the medium, in the Sumi E paintings, which, let me see if I can switch. So here, this is the other tornado painting in the gallery. It's also a promised gift, so it will be part of our collection. And it's actually kind of appropriate on the left that my my reflection is in the glass, because in the mid 60s, Joe was painting these images of the sky, and then he started putting plexiglass in front of them, partly to protect the work, but more because he wanted the viewer to be part of the image. And so this idea that, you know, you can see yourself in this sky, or you can see yourself in this painting. So what the actual painting looks like is on the right, of course, but that's my reflection in the left. And we talked a little bit about this in the gallery. I should point out, so it's a sumi-e painting, which it means black ink painting in Japanese, and it's on washi paper, which is a handmade paper. He would have soaked the portion of the paper that he was going to draw on or paint on, and then you can tell on the right that he's also flicked the paint. He's let the ink. He's let the ink spread, but he doesn't have complete control over it as a medium. And there are a lot of these. So this is number 35, but there's, you know, more than 100 of these pretty large paintings. They're about, well, almost 4 feet, 3.5, 4 feet tall. And I think you had said maybe yesterday that, or 2 days ago, that lion is not actually, this isn't actually a tornado that we're familiar with.
Yeah, these are the names on this set of tornado drawings don't ring any bells with me, and I'm pretty good with tornado, you know, with tornado locations. But what really strikes me about this, there's a couple of things. You know, I see this tornado coming through the, you know, through the trees at the bottom, and and there's that debris cloud along the ground. There's the dirt hanging around it that's getting kicked up. That, you know, boy, that's captured that well. And then there are the bigger things that have gotten lofted and carried around at the top. And you really, when you get up close to this, you really get the sense of motion of those things. And there's I think the first time it was done was with a tornado in Dallas in 1957, in which a researcher went through, and by having a couple of closely taken photographs, or close in time taken photographs, actually did what we call photogrammetry to estimate the wind speeds in that area based on individual pieces of debris moving. And there's been some work done obviously since then. That's, you know, cameras have gotten quicker and a little bit and more photographs, but that there's a real sense of motion that takes place in this image that is both at the low levels around the ground, and then the stuff that chunky, what we call chunky debris, that's up aloft that's going around. I think he did an incredible job of capturing that, and I think that technique of having to kind of scatter the ink works incredibly well for this kind of an image.
Right. I mean, it really feels alive.
Yes.
And the fact that it, you know, came alive in a sense on the paper is, yeah, I agree. And these, if you, I would encourage everyone to look online to find more of these, because they all have such a different quality depending, you know, some of them it's more about the kind of like the ominous imminent storm right in front of you, and then some of them are further away like this, and you get that kind of iconic tornado shape.
And Hadley, there was a question I saw pop up in chat that you might be able to answer that would be good to answer now. Would he have done this painting all in one shot, or would this be, I do this chunk, I do that chunk, I do that chunk, and take a while to do? Well,
I'm probably not the best person to answer this question. So I know Mark White, the curator of the show, is watching, so Mark can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he would have done this all at once. And it's because, you know, once you start on one of these sumi-e paintings, you can't stop, you can't erase. It's, you know, you move forward. I mean, that's my understanding, but Mark, please correct me if I'm wrong. And you don't wet the whole paper. You would wet the part of the paper where you're going to put ink. So he would have dampened the part, you know, where this column of the cloud is, and then at the bottom. And then you can use a dry brush to kind of pull the ink, to kind of direct it and where you want it to go. So I think maybe some of this, where you see this kind of fuzzy edge along the left edge of the cloud. He's encouraged the ink to spread in that direction. But then those droplets, if you look close, there's they're really tiny little specks of ink, and that's got to be dry on dry paper, I think. Otherwise, it would have just spread out, kind of like that cluster of like 3 kind of circular forms up to on the upper right, which I think are especially kind of lovely. But yeah, Marielle, it's my understanding that you would do it all at once. And I think that would also be true in the case of the large ones that I showed earlier, with View, which was, 14 feet tall, each of those pieces of paper.
But I would think if he's having to what little sections, there would be sort of we do this part, and then that might tell him, inform of what he does next.
Right.
Because maybe the ink kind of went this way. Well, I need to. That may not have been my original thought, but that the organic process we talked about of making it, that he would have to have. Okay, well, I need to do this now because the first bit went this way, and let me move over here, and we kind of grow as he made it.
Right, and in a way, that's it's not really about the specifics of that particular storm.
Right.
It's I mean, it has a name, but
yeah,
it's almost like these have a mind of their own too.
Yes. Yes.
And he just a little art historical aside. So Joe and his friends were kind of pushing back against, or moving past, in a way, abstract expressionism in school. And then, he makes these big gestural paintings like this. I mean, you think about the one where he's walking on the surface with a mop. And there's, to me, a relationship between abstract expressionism and these paintings, even though they're figural and representational. It's interesting. Well, I do want to show some of these prints that are also in the collection, and I have a couple of images of them. And let's see. So this is another peek behind the scenes. This is in our photo vault, and I'm gonna invite Amanda to come back on because she can share some about the etching process. And this is a series of 10 prints. So they're bound together, and you can see this kind of handmade paper, the box that they come in, and they're artist proofs, which means it's an edition of 10, but each of those sets is not exactly alike. There's some variation, and they each have a name. And not only is it referring to a specific tornado, but then how many people were killed in that tornado. And these are Oklahoma tornadoes. So these are probably definitely inspired by Gary England's book.
Yeah, so yesterday, Hadley and I had the opportunity to take a look at these in the vault. And when I saw this suite as we were going through them, one of the things that really I was so impressed by was kind of the menacing mood that Joe was able to capture with these images. And he really chose quite the perfect process to do that with etching and printmaking. And so how he did these really kind of dark, rich, funnel cloud areas that have so much depth to them when you see them in person. And Hadley will probably talk about it a little bit more later, but they are going to go on view soon in the museum, and I do invite you to come see them in person. But they're not just, this flat layer. Like, you can really see so far through this darkness. And the way he's able to do that is by using a very specific etching process called aquatint. And hopefully this will be interesting to everyone other than my printmaking nerdy self, but so I'll walk you through how this happens. So basically, with printmaking, generally you use a copper or zinc plate, and so what happens with the aquatint is you have a giant wooden box that's about the size of a person, 5-6 feet tall. And aquatint is made with a kind of dust-like resin. So it's a powder material that sits in the bottom of this enclosed box. And so there's a fan at the bottom of the box. You turn the fan on, or you manually, crank a fan, and it kicks all this resin dust into the air inside the box. And then what you want to do is wait usually about a minute or two, because you want to create a really fine layer of dust that covers your entire copper plate in a very even layer. And just like any kind of dust or any kind of particle, there's going to be different sizes of particles, right? So you wait a few moments so that the larger particles that are heavier can fall first, and you leave the fine material still in the air inside your box. And then that's when you put the plate inside. And so you put your plate in and you close the door and you wait a few more minutes usually. And this is all pretty, you know, it gets timed down to the second, like to have it just quite right. But when you pull your plate back out, it should be completely covered. And then, but it's dust, right? It's just sitting on top of a piece of metal. So how do you get it to adhere? So then you have to warm up your metal plate, and you put it on a warming plate that then melts the resin. And so the resin then melts in these little fine little dots. Okay, so now we have resin stuck to our copper plate, but now what? Like, where's the etching part of it? So etching refers to acid baths that are used to eat into the actual surface of the plate. So then you take your aquatint plate, you put it in an acid bath, and depending for how long you leave it in the acid eats around each little tiny particle that has melted. So that's how you can get this extremely fine, extremely rich and velvety kind of black. And you can make a darker black depending on how long you leave it in the acid. So the longer you leave it, the deeper the etch, the deeper the bite the acid's going to create, and the more ink that plate will hold. And so you can create this huge variation of different shades of this black in any way. And so what Joe was doing, so he'd cover the entire plate. So the whole thing would probably be this extremely dark black. And then you take a polishing tool, like a burnisher, and then you pull the light areas back out by repolishing the surface of the copper plate, because then it won't hold as much ink. So there's so much room with this process for play, for variation, and all different kinds of things that, you know, has a little bit of an unpredictable nature as well. You know, when you put it in the acid bath, it's kind of, you know, well, you know, you can try and time it out as much as you want, but generally there is an element of surprise at some point, which is quite fascinating. And Hadley, there's another one. Can you go to the sugar lift image?
This one?
Okay, so
Yeah.
this one, yeah, you can see the one on the left side, how there's a lot of kind of this, looks like water, right? Or kind of a liquid feel to it. And so that is a sugar lift process, which is also a part of aquatint. And that is extremely unpredictable. So you paint on sort of an etching liquid onto the surface of the aquatint. But because, you know, it's liquid on top of metal, it doesn't seep into the surface like it would in a piece of paper or something like that. So it kind of bubbles and does its own thing. So you can't, that has a really unpredictable, very hard to control nature about it, which is so perfect for these images, I think.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I'll just say, I think this series is incredibly remarkable, and I'm looking forward to them actually being, to when you guys are able to publicly show them, because these highlight, we mentioned Woodward is sort of a folk memory. A lot of these other ones that we're showing, like Snyder, this is the second deadliest tornado in Oklahoma history. It has that same feel. There was the first big killer tornado in that we know of. Pre-statehood was that 1893 Cleveland County. That was 10 Mile Flats in Norman. Yeah. And it was, you know, at that point there weren't very many people out, you know, living there, and having 30 deaths is a lot. The Antlers tornado is it's probably the least known really deadly tornado in modern U.S. history, because it happened the same day as Franklin Roosevelt died. Okay. So even in the Oklahoma papers, it didn't get a whole lot of publicity, because it just was like, and Muskogee's on the same day. Those two tornadoes happened, and you know, having you just don't get newspaper coverage even in Oklahoma City or Tulsa, because it was the death of Roosevelt, overwhelmed everything. But these are the antlers one. I'm probably going to spend a long time staring at that one when it goes on, because that just is such a neat thing. And even and Muskogee also, there's stuff going on in all of these that are very reminiscent of photographs of real tornadoes, even though he didn't have those to go with at the time. Because at the time he actually even made these in 1991, our catalog of tornado photographs and tornado videos wasn't actually all that large.
Really?
Well, because I mean, we start there are movies that are taken of tornadoes, but it's pretty hard to do. Until you get to relatively modern times when, okay, you can take things with your phone, or it's easy to take a camera out. Back when you had to have, take a 16 millimeter film and set up a camera and get good lighting on it, that was hard to do. Because I still vividly remember a tornado from 1985 in Pennsylvania, that when it was shown as part of the slide and video show at the American Meteorological Society Severe Local Storms Conference, it really made an impression on everybody, because people who chased had seen things like that, but you just didn't see that many videos and movies of them. And so this is that the last 30 years, that whole, as video has become easier, all that process has become a lot more common. But that, it's not that long before he was making these that getting a decent video of a tornado was really hard to do.
Right. So they're much more about maybe an emotional response to tornadoes.
Yeah, but it's captured. I mean, I see these things and I go, if I haven't seen it in person, I've seen people who've taken pictures that look like a lot of the things we've got, but almost all of the pictures I can think of that look like this are either very close to this time, and I doubt if he would have had access to them, because they wouldn't have been put into a public place where he would have seen them. This was, back when it was still shared among the research community and the chase community, that you actually would have had the chance to see the things that were happening. They weren't that public. Weather Channel wasn't that old. There weren't lots of TV specials on, there'd been a couple, but not a whole lot of TV specials that talked about how tornadoes look. This is pre-Twister, and everybody has to go get a picture of things. And that's a pretty big, in terms of getting visuals of tornadoes, that's a pretty big marker.
Really?
For us in the community, so they're gorgeous, though. I mean, it's just,
I thought I would just go back and share the Drumright image, which I thought was really particularly incredible.
Drumright looks real. I mean, there's that hint, of that storm structure. I mentioned the clear slot earlier. I can kind of see that. Maybe he doesn't have the best wall cloud, but okay, we'll give him one. We'll give him one small mulligan for that. But it's if someone showed me this as a photograph, I'd go, I could believe that actually was real. And that's, I think, I've seen a lot of supposed photographs from long ago of tornadoes that were faked, that don't look as realistic as this does. He did a great job. And the variety of things he gets, when you look at the whole collection, you span the range of almost the entire range of what tornadoes look like. And if you go through the entire thing, and that's really impressive to me.
It's that whole idea of being far away or up in the middle,
right.
Of the thing, how your perception changes depending on your relationship to it. And
absolutely,
an artist who was constantly dealing with perception in his own work, I think that this one series even reflects that. Within it, this one particular subject. Well, I think we should give everybody a chance to ask Dr. Brooks questions if you all have any additional questions. I did want to point out that Mark did answer Marielle's question in the chat, so I stand corrected. Mark says he often works on multiple pieces at once, although he can't say for sure with the tornado pieces, but he could not have completed the lion painting in one session and would have worked on it over multiple days. Okay, so not just at once. Well, thank you, everybody, and please share your questions with Dr. Brooks or Amanda or me in the chat. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you all can see us instead.
Okay. Okay, I saw, let me see if I get to where I can see the chat as this comes up, because I just saw one that popped through me. Okay, seasonal outlooks for around here are really hard to do. There's a group that I'm not quite part of, but I will be at least going through discussions that tries to do seasonal forecast on a national scale, but our signal in Oklahoma isn't very good. There's at least a suggestion that it's more likely than not that things will be active in the Ohio Valley this spring. Unfortunately, the large scale conditions that we can use to help make those forecasts, the relationship in Oklahoma just isn't very good. It's much easier to do things in the to do some aspects on the long range in the eastern part of the U.S. There is some effort now, and this I think has real promise of being able to look out for big potential for significant outbreaks maybe 2 to 3 weeks in advance. That's a new thing, and I think we actually have those several active days in a row. I think we're able to do that relatively well, and that works well out here. We didn't have anything last year. They did highlight some things in 2019 that technique actually worked on. I'm really excited about that.
Sweet.
Someone did ask what your favorite piece is.
Oh gosh, yeah, boy, that's it's in some ways it's my reaction to a lot of art. It kind of depends on the mood I'm in today, and what I've actually looked at and what I've actually thought about recently. That the antlers thing is certainly fabulous. There's some of the Sumi works. I mean, I'm not familiar with them until just a few days ago, kind of thing on those on some of them that there's one of them, and I can't remember the names of them because they aren't real tornado days. Are really nice. The Woodward is gosh, it captures so much stuff that works well. And then when I compare it to the Woodward etching, it's like, well, there's a wide range of things that are there. I mean, my guess is if I walk in and see when you get those up one time, I'll probably give you a different answer every couple of days. So.
Well, I would be loath to choose just one myself.
You're paid not to choose just one, right? Yeah,
20,000 things in this in the collection. They're all my favorite. I was gonna. Oh, I guess I just forgot my question. I'm sorry.
I'll say something else that in terms of our interaction as sort of the aesthetic attraction of tornadoes. That we have there's sort of this odd coupling, particularly here in Oklahoma, I think, because of the consciousness of the events, there's this odd connection between the destruction and the beauty. Because tornadoes are, even when they happen a lot, which here is a place where they happen really well, they're still rare events. And it looks there's such a contrast to what normally the sky should look like, that I think that's an attraction. And again, if you get the lighting right, there was a tornado, an interview with a survivor that I saw after a tornado near Purcell. I want to say it was September the 2nd, 1992. That her house had been significantly damaged, and the tornado moved on to the east, and she came out from her shelter location, and it was one of those rare things that everything was just right, that the sun's behind her and the rain wrapping around the tornado. There was a rainbow, that full half circle rainbow with the tornado in the middle. And this woman's getting interviewed on TV about having survived the tornado and she ends up talking about how pretty it was as it went away. And I'm going, my brain probably wouldn't make that connection.
I always think that after those, I mean, even I guess it was probably the May 3rd tornado. After those storms pass, it's always the most beautiful day.
Mhm.
So it's the air is clear, and I guess I maybe it's too technical of a. I am curious about that green color. You know,
Oh,
there's this like color to the sky that's different, and I think artists would definitely be attracted.
r- the
It's eerie.
green, yeah, we don't fully understand the green. It's real. I mean, I mean, and by real, I mean people have taken out, you know, uh, what is it called? Uh, Color sensing instruments to do the spectrography,
Mhm.
and it's not just a my eye perceives this color because of something weird happening. And there have been people who suggested it's for all kinds of odd things. It appears that the green is almost certainly related to the presence of hail
Mhm.
and what ice does to when light interacts with little balls of ice, and strange things start to happen. But we still don't have a full explanation. There was actually a guy who about 20 years ago did the most serious study on it, and the correlation is with hail. I mean, you know, hail's a really interesting thing in terms of senses as well, because hailstones, they've done some research on it that uh, relatively large hailstones uh, spin because they're not completely spherical, and so there's lots of the little things they'll get them to spin as they fall, and they tend to spin at about 60 hertz, so 60 times a second. And so you actually people and chasers in particular refer to what they call the hail roar, because there's this low sound that comes from the fact that the hailstones are actually falling, and with that spin you can actually hear that. And so that's one of those other senses that we may not always think about, is that, and part of the noise is you hear that, you see the green, and there's sort of those things that we perceive but may not be at a real conscious level. You just understand that's happening, and I think that's something that we kind of need to know.
Well, Marilyn has said, I wonder about the experience of this work for a person who has no memory of tornadoes. To what extent does the art empower us to bring our own memories and emotions? Harold is so right. There is destruction and beauty, but is that true because we live with tornadoes? That we see both sides, I guess.
Oh. Yeah, I don't know, Marilyn. That's really an interesting thought. That, I mean, there's been some work done that um, people always try to understand even rare events, and that what is called in some places folk science. So Marilyn, some work that Randy Pepler and Kim Cloko McLean, as part of her PhD in the geography department, we're looking at how people they interpret anything we do with forecasting or the occurrence of tornadoes in terms of something that they can try to understand. A lot of location-based stuff. That, for instance, somebody living in Norman, if I tell you there's a tornado happening in Chickasha, that brings up a completely different level of feeling than if I tell you there's a tornado happening, in El Reno, even though they're roughly the same distance from Norman, just because of how the storms move. That for a lot of people, Chickasha means if you're in Norman, that means we may have a problem in a while. In El Reno, well, we're probably okay there. That's not a big problem. And the same thing, Kim found a lot of stuff in one small town in particular in Mississippi, that their understanding was that they didn't have a problem unless the tornado crossed the Tombigbee, Tennessee River waterway. And so they didn't activate any of their sirens or anything like that until it had crossed that, which was way too late.
Mm-hmm.
And as a meteorologist going, well, you're in really big trouble. I could see the thing coming. And they waited until it had crossed that, and that became, oh, now it's a problem. And that whole, how we understand things from what we bring to even the rarest event, because you tell someone, let's imagine We're going to tell somebody in Galveston, Texas that got to get below freezing for several days. That happens once in 100 years. Their understanding of that, probably affected what they did in the last couple of weeks. Do birds behave in odd ways before a tornado? I don't know if we know much about birds and tornadoes specifically. Birds are animal behavior. We hear stories that it's really hard to do the controlled experiments to actually know. My guess is probably there are animals that this is just completely off the top of my head, but things like the hail roar. If you think about animal hearing, they may pick up on some of that things. I think back to a dog of ours that sensed the first waves from the earthquake. I want to say 2011, and a couple of seconds before we felt it, the dog was going bananas. And I think that was just being able to sense that really low frequency sound wave that was going on. So I would imagine animals can do that, but it's probably not really long in advance of what's happening. Although the weather can, the warm, moist air that typically occurs before a tornado, that may affect them in sort of but that would probably affect them any day that it was warm, moist air at low levels. So not sure what we can do with that.
I'm gonna like to circle back to Marilyn's question from earlier, and she says, to what extent does the art empower us to bring our own memories and emotions to the work? And that makes me think about, everyone brings their own emotions and experiences to every piece of art that one views, and that's something that we think about a lot here at the museum. It is interesting to think about in relationship to this artwork, how differently is it received by someone who is not from Oklahoma, who has never lived in this kind of environment. And then the fact that, Joe is making them in California and Los Angeles. And so when they're viewed out there, what is the perception? When I lived in California and I told people I was from Oklahoma, the first thing they'd say is, "Oh my God, have you seen a tornado?" And so even though, they're not from this area, it's still, it's prevalent in their experiences of this place as well, even though they haven't been here personally. So I think that's a really great question and thought to think about.
Well, and to go with that, I think there's also and this is one of you mentioned I do the decision making under uncertainty kind of work. One of the things that we're grappling with as a group, the weather community in Norman, we're working on doing some things that will hopefully that may change the way we communicate forecasts, the way we make forecasts, the way we do that. And a lot of what we have to try to figure out is how do we convey that information in a way to people that allows them to make good decisions. Now there's a question of what do you mean by a good decision too, but and one of the groups that we struggle in some areas. One are some people who are difficult to communicate with at times because of issues. So the hearing impaired or the visually impaired, that's a challenge as to how do you get information. We also deal with the problem of how do we deal with the people who haven't experienced things very often. I mean, I know I think I know kind of how to trigger responses in Oklahoma because of the wealth of experience, but the same tornado in a different place where they occur less often, how do I actually get that person to respond the very first time they're under threat? Because they may not get another chance to do this right. And I think that's one of the things that how things like this kind of collection could be used to help yeah, I don't want maybe the word is educate, to get people prepared to make that right kind of decision the first time they do it. Are there ways we can help people understand the event when they haven't experienced it themselves?
Well, and actually Angela just made a comment that I think is perfectly in response to what you just said. She says, I'm not from Oklahoma. I just moved here and I saw the exhibit. The tornado paintings are terrifying and I live in Moore. I worry about tornado season and having to get inside my storm shelter. I think if you live anywhere, Angela, probably this is the best area to live, to be prepared at least, or to know that you're going to have some warning. I don't know, maybe that's naive of me to say, but
our forecasters are pretty good.
Yeah.
Our communication's pretty good. We were also, one of the things that in some sense is fortunate is that we have a relatively narrow season. Most of the tornadoes are in the spring. Most of the tornadoes are late afternoon, early evening. So we don't do the middle of the night in wintertime that the southeastern United States sometimes has to deal with. So that's a fortunate thing. You should also know Moore is not particularly hated by tornadoes. This comes back to how we perceive things, that there've been some big events in Moore recently, but if you take a look at our whole record since the 1880s, you can't pick Moore out on the map as to where things were. It's just been, a couple of 98, 99, 2003, and 2013 are the big events that sort of happen and cluster in that way. And just the curious geography of how Moore is defined. If Moore was aligned north, south, east, west, or more north, south instead of being a little blob, we'd think of everything having hit Norman. And Norman's gotten hit more than people give it credit for, but it's mostly been east of the main populated area. So that's if you made a dartboard and we threw darts, there'd be some place that I would even be able to throw darts, that if I threw enough of them, a few of them would be close to each other. And that's kind of the thing that it's Moore happened to have been is the place in the dartboard. Oh gosh, public storm shelters and the likelihood of more severe storms. It's not clear what's going to happen, particularly with tornadoes in the future with climate. That there's evidence that there will be more severe thunderstorms as we go over the next, say, 75 years. But there'll also be a lot more variability associated with occurrence. There'll be more big times and more few and small times for storms. Tornadoes, it's a lot harder to tell what's going on. There's a real public policy question about public storm shelters, and they're really challenging to figure out what to do with it. For the most part, most people in the field prefer sheltering in place, in large part because if we have public storm shelters, people drive to them. And now we've got people out on the road, and if we exceed the capacity, the last time Norman opened, there was at one point there was a public storm shelter at Cleveland Elementary School, and the last time that it was opened was May 24th, 2011. So 2 days after the Joplin tornado, which caused people to respond in interesting ways. And I think it was supposed to be able to hold close to 1,000 people, and 3,000 people showed up. We now have 2,000 people that are in really bad places. And so that's a real concern. One of the things to know is that for people who are inside of an quote ordinary frame home without a special tornado shelter, and they were inside at the time that place was hit by a tornado that created either F4 or F5 damage to that structure, so high-end stuff, 1% to 2% of the people die. So your chances of survival are at one level, one way you look at it, your chances of survival are really good. It may not be very pleasant, and 1% to 2% chance of dying is a large number. That's essentially, as we know from trying to understand COVID statistics, that's essentially doubling your chances of dying this year, which is that's a big number, but at the same time, if you do the right thing, get into the lowest floor interior room away from windows and get as low as you can in that room, your chances of survival are very, very good. And that 1% to 2% number is based on several storms. Moore 1999, Birmingham 1998, even more 2013, same kind of thing, statistics come out of it. So that's the public shelter debate, especially in urban areas, is really hard. If you're in a small town and I can build something that I'm going to use for other purposes, and I can put everybody in there, that's okay. What I tell people, and this is what my wife and I did, was we did an addition under our house back in 2005, 2006, and as part of that, we have a walk-in closet that's our in-residence shelter, and we spent that. It adds, 1 to 2% of the cost of the structure. If I would have tried to retrofit my old house without doing that, it would have been much more expensive. But as long as I was putting out the money to do that big project, that was worthwhile. So new construction should probably really always think about those things. And I like the fact that I know that I could be in bed and be in my shelter in less than 15 seconds. And I don't have to worry about going outside. I don't have to worry about doing things. So if you're building something new, you should do it. From a weather safety standpoint, where's the safest area in the country? Boy, every place just about has some kind of a threat. And it kind of depends on, you have to, at one level, you have to pick your poison. Joe Goode, Hadley shared I could freeze to death in lots of places. A lot of it has to do with our resilience to those effects, and how well our places are could handle things. I lived, as Amanda said, I got my master's degree at Columbia, and so I lived in Manhattan, and we had one 20-inch snowstorm while I was there, and by Wednesday or Thursday, after the tornado after the snow over the weekend, in Manhattan, unless you went into a park, you couldn't tell it had snowed. 2 weeks later, I was out in one of the outer boroughs for something, and it was like, oh my gosh, they still haven't gotten everything cleaned up. So how a lot of it is our resilience to how we respond to these kinds of events and how well prepared we are. But every place has some, do you want to avoid hurricanes, or do you want to avoid snow, lots of rain all the time? And yeah.
Oh. Brad has a great comment. He says, great conversation and thoughts on the ideas of folk memory and history. Have heard family stories about the 1900 Galveston hurricane and the 1953 Waco, Texas tornado. Those events fascinated him. Now living in Oklahoma and seeing some of these events, I can definitely understand the cultural impacts, memories, and lore.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And Lara asked,
I'm going to field Laura's question really quick. So she's asking, where's the best place to park to visit the museum? Laura, really quick, there's a parking lot right across from Boyd and Elm on the corner there. It's the farthest parking lot to the left, to the left. And the museum parking, there'll be little signs, and they're on the right side of that one lot. I'm going to go ahead. We've gone a little bit past time, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I would like to go ahead and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and don't forget to mark your calendars for the next Coffee with the Collection on Friday, April 16th at 9:30 a.m. Featuring the Kadishman's Sacrifice of Isaac, presented by Shul Shepkaru, the Schusterman Professor of Jewish Intellectual and Religious History here at the University of Oklahoma. I also want to mention that OKLA is getting ready to close soon. So if you do want to come see these pieces, it will be closed March 7th, I believe. So you have a little bit of time to get up here. And we're getting ready to do our last virtual program featuring this exhibition and artist Ed Ruscha, and that's taking place next Friday, March 5th at 3 p.m. And this will be a panel discussion with the curator of the exhibit, Dr. Mark White, two curators from Oklahoma Contemporary discussing their own exhibition featuring Ed Ruscha, as well as special guests Oklahoma City Mayor David Holt and Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti. And this should be a really interesting exploration into the lasting influence of Oklahoma on the career of Los Angeles-based artist Ed Ruscha. So I'll send out the links to those to register for those upcoming events when I send the recording from today's discussion. I guess thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much, Dr. Brooks, for taking the time to share your expertise with us and your perspective on this work.
Welcome. I had a good time. So
thank you so much, everybody. Have a great weekend.